Are you a promise keeper? Can God count on you to build his kingdom? Can God count on you to defend his name? And God says to us, are you loyal or are you a liability? Are you loyal to the cause or are you causing issues? Are you loyal or are you a liability? Most of us don't like liabilities. Light bill, phone bill, car payment, mortgage, rent, stuff are liabilities. We like assets, right? But life is about assets and liabilities. And I say to myself, I don't want to be a liability in someone's life. I need to be an asset. I need to bring something to the table that's of value. Based on your character, are others willing to defend you? David's humility and loyalty as a shepherd allowed him to be elevated to the place of kingship. Can God elevate you because you are loyal? Can your job elevate you because you are loyal? The job says working 9 to 5, and you said, well, it's more like 9 to 3:30. The job says we need all these papers, and you said, well, I don't have any papers at home in my printer, so I think I'm going to take a few sheets. They won't miss it. The job says, I'm going to give you overtime if you actually work some overtime. And what we do is we take the overtime, but Facebook, Twitter, and we do everything else other than the time that should be spent being productive. Am I talking to anybody in the room? If you're guilty, just wear a bigger size shoes next time. God's vengeance will manifest itself when others who promised to defend his name does not do so. God has an assignment for all of us. I can't compare my ability to be an orator to that of my husband or to that of Pastor Sutherland or to that of anybody I see on the internet. Because all of us have an assignment. All of us have a way with which God ministers in us and through us. And so when you come into the kingdom, you have an assignment for such a time as this. Are you divided in the things that God has asked you to do? Are you busy making your to-do list and God is not on your list? Are you busy wondering what next, what next, what next? God said, what about what last, what last, what last, I said. So we're asking God for the next, but we haven't completed the last thing. We're trying to move to a higher level, but we haven't balanced ourselves on the level we're currently standing on. And God is saying to you, do not be divided in your loyalty to me. I have a place that I've set aside for you. And unless you are willing to do what I have asked, don't come to me with your requests. Jonathan was willing to allow David to escape, despite the fact that Saul was his father. Is there anyone you're willing to defend, even though it might look contrary to the belief of others? Some people say, I would not still be a part of that ministry. Those people are crooked. Those people are whatever. A lot of people say, I wouldn't even be bothered. But can I tell you something? If God has positioned you and you move out of position, now you're exposed to the enemy. And when you're exposed to the enemy, whatever happens to you is what happens to you. Because when you've moved from under a place of your covering, there's no way we can defend you when you're not under the place of your covering. Hallelujah. Don't be comfortable in the enemy's camp. Even David, when he hid with the Philistines, eventually he gave himself away. And if you stay in the enemy's camp long enough, somebody will recognize you. If you go to the club, somebody will recognize you. If you go to the bar, somebody will recognize you. Every place you go, there is an unseen eye that will recognize that you're in the wrong place. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." I'll say that again. We will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. How many friends have you had that you wished they would have defended you? How many friends have you had that you wished? I see you laughing back there. How many friends do you have that you wished they would have said something when you were in trouble? They would have come to your rescue. But they acted as if in that moment they did not know who you were. Be careful of your soul ties. Because some of those people will take you to places that you did not expect to get to. And so David ends up in Ramah. And he ends up in the place where Samuel, who initially anointed him, shared his dilemma with Samuel. And Samuel gave him some instruction. And so here comes the men of Saul. And when the men of Saul show up to where David and Samuel were, God does something miraculous. They start to prophesy. And so Saul realizes, my first plan did not work. Let me send another set. The enemy, when he comes after you the first time and it doesn't work, don't think he's not going to try something else. And so the second time around, the enemy comes. And they see Samuel, and they see David. And they start to prophesy as well. Because God will cause your enemies to become your footstool. So if you walk around in life thinking you have no enemies, wake up. Everywhere you go, you have enemies. And so here it is that Saul himself, as the king, decides, I am going to go and see what's going on. And so Saul shows up. And when Saul shows up in that place, something happens before the same thing that happened to the other men happens to Saul. You want to know what happened? Saul strips down naked first. Can I tell you, the Lord will allow your enemies to become bare before you. Eventually, they'll have to tell the truth before you. And so Saul was forced to be naked before he began prophesying. And I asked God, I said, why is it that King Saul had to be naked before he started prophesying, because the other men that came, they just started prophesying. And God said, Saul had to lay down his power, his pride, and his philosophy. Are you willing to lay down your power? Are you willing to stop trying to do it yourself to make things happen? Are you ready to get the real job that God intended? Are you ready to join the real ministry that God intended? Are you really ready for God to use you the way that he intended? In order to do that, you've got to lay your power down. I remember hearing a testimony of someone that said, I didn't know who I was until this happened. Do you have a this happened and then I became this person? We all have a this happened to me and it resulted in me becoming this person. For some of us, that's divorce. Divorce gave us a wake-up call that we had a little bit more strength than we thought we had. Hello? Some of us had to lose a job to become entrepreneurs. Hallelujah. Some of us had to be on our last dime to recognize how necessary it was to keep our dimes together. Some of us gave away not just our money and our resources, we gave away parts of ourselves to people. And now we're trying to collect all those parts back to make the whole person. Because I keep hearing, Brother James, people say, this is my better half. No, I told my husband, I don't have a better half and I am not your better half. I am your better whole. Because if I'm broken, and you're broken, two broken people are only going to be broken even the more. And so wholeness is godliness. And it makes no sense for us to keep saying, I want to be with you and I want to be with you, but let me get myself together. Trust me, you're going to be getting yourself together till the day they close your casket. Am I talking to anyone? Because we always will have parts of us that are still broken. Paul said to Yeshua, please take this thorn away from me. Please allow this thing to depart. And God looked at Paul and said, I appreciate the request, but my grace is sufficient for you. Can I tell somebody today, God's grace is sufficient for you. Hallelujah. God's grace is sufficient for you. When you're in school and kids are mean, God's grace is sufficient for you. When you're on the job, Dr. Sutherland, and they act unruly, you just look at all of them and say, but grace. Ha, kondolobosi. When you're on your job and you are being promoted and people are saying, oh, but he just got here. You look at them and you say, this is what grace looks like. Hallelujah. I can't help that God's grace rests on my life. And so sometimes you've got to look at people, Brother James, and you've got to look them square in the face and say, grace, thank you. When they start to talk and they keep talking, you just look at them and say, grace, keep it moving. That's it. Hallelujah. Grace be upon you. More grace. And so God says to us, when your life is pleasing to him, he'll allow your enemies to be at peace with you. Do you ever walk into your job and sometimes people that are acting up, they've been written up and whatever, and they're looking at you, Auntie Dar, and they say to you, I don't understand. Why are you smiling? I'm miserable and you are smiling. Why are you? Well, Sister Melissa, I guess they'll just be laughing, looking at you. But they just keep saying, you're always smiling. What is there to smile about? and you look them in the face and you say, God's grace has kept me. If not for God's grace, I would not walk through this door. If not for God's grace, I would not get out of my bed. If not for God's grace, I would not even be friends with you. Hallelujah. So God is saying, even when your house is in turmoil, walk around your house and say, grace, 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 God's grace. Hallelujah. Because there's nothing like God's grace. If not for God's grace, we would all be devoured.